Thank you, Jennifer, for your talk and for your practice. So I think we can start recording now, and we are. So are there any questions?
I have a question. This is Liz. And I was reading an article in Abhidharma, the summer issue. And it was about Amidharma. I'm saying that right, Amidharma. Not sure if I'm saying it correct. But the author, it was actually an excerpt from the author's book, but talked about, I'm not so sure used it as an analogy necessarily, but that if you think of a polymer, which is just a string of carbon, and I'm not a scientist, so I'm just saying what I remember from the article, that there's a string of carbon, and then that carbon all comes together to be plastic, and then it's a plastic bottle. So we see the form of the bottle, but it had all this causes and conditioning. And he was saying that the Abhidharma is, I'm not sure if it was just a sutra, a school of thought. Because I'd never really heard of Abhidharma. So do you know what he's referring to and can give a little bit more background on that?
Yeah, Abhidharma literally means the later Dharma, the later teaching. In other words, all the elaborations on Buddha's original teaching that took place in the centuries after he lived. So it's a lot of philosophy and a lot of psychology to an extraordinary degree. And it's an extremely substantial body of literature. It said that the Buddha himself would ascend to the Tushita heaven, actually the heaven right below the Tushita heaven, to meet his mother, who had died in childbirth. And he taught her the entire Abhidharma. So not only his early teaching, but all of the elaborations of his later teaching. And that he would come after he taught his mother, and that this was during a monsoon season. He would come down every day for an entire monsoon season. He would come down and give a summary of it to Subhuti, who was his student who recorded everything. It's like Subhuti was the recording secretary for Buddha. This, in some sense, doesn't make any sense because the Abhidharma was clearly elaborated upon for centuries after the Buddha, and this story has to do with, well, no, actually, Buddha actually taught this to his mother, and he did dictate it to Subhuti, and it all got transmitted. The Heart Sutra is a refutation of the Abhidharma. So everything that we learned, for instance, about form, feelings, perceptions, impulses, consciousness, all of these, the recitation of all the various lists in the Heart Sutra are all negated because everything is empty. So the Heart Sutra, we'd say, is the Mahayana's response to Theravadan Buddhism. All of the long, complicated sutras and shastras, which are not sutras, but sometimes commentary on sutras or other writings entirely. So it's a tremendously complex body of teaching. Anything before the Mahayana, say, anything before the Avatamsaka Sutra, you might say, is the Abhidharma. That's at least a beginning of an answer to your question. But that's what it's referring to the elaborations, the later elaborations of Buddha's original teaching with all of its complications. So when I taught the class on the Heart Sutra, and I think the notes for that anyway are online, on our website or some summary of it. And I tried there to do like a quick synopsis of the Abhidharma. So you might look there for a little more detail, more than I can recall right now. Thank you. Are there any other questions? So I might pick up on Jennifer's allusion to the opening lines of the Hsin Shin MIng. The great way is not difficult, just don't pick and choose. Goes on in that stanza, cut off all likes and dislikes, and it is clear like space. Clear like space is one of Zen Master Sung San's sayings. Clear like space, clear like a mirror. So the great way is not difficult under the condition, not picking and choosing, that is most difficult for human beings. We all have our preferences. Sometimes they're petty. Sometimes we think they're quite significant. For instance, I prefer Buddhism to Christianity. I grew up a Catholic, then I became a Buddhist. So should I not have that preference? And you can elaborate on that ad infinitum, I think. So what does it mean to have no preferences? The Hsin Shin MIng is a very terse Chinese poem. It's just 4 syllables per line of verse. Usually Chinese poems are 7 or at least 5 syllables. So it's very condensed. Sometimes just don't pick and choose is translated as simply have no preferences. And I don't know which one is better. I thought pick and choose was punchier anyway. But the idea, the behind meaning, kind of use one of Zen Master Sung San's pidgin English terms, don't hold on to, don't cling to your opinions. So it's perfectly normal and even useful to discriminate between what might be useful and what is not useful. And you could define those as choices or preferences. But clinging to your opinions is definitely not the great way. So great way implies a way that is broad and wide and open to everyone. To everyone who has chosen not to cling to personal preferences. We all know what our petty personal preferences are. I will refrain from listing mine if that's okay, but I'm well aware of them. These are the obstacles on the way. Cut off all likes and dislikes, and it is perfectly clear and open and wide and easily negotiated. But we put all of these roadblocks in the way, in the great way, and spend most of our lives just bumping into them and wondering why things aren't going better. So I just wanted to put that those first 2 lines and that first stanza of the Hsin Shin MIng into some kind of context, and be talking about the whole poem. I guess in a few weeks. It's not very long anyway. It's 36 4-line stanzas, and there's a lot in it. It's just a brilliant piece. So I look forward to discussing that with anybody who's interested. So are there any questions now?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So are those the roadblocks that you're talking about? are those things that we get rid of or just not pay attention to?
I'm talking about roadblocks that we put there ourselves, not about life difficulties which seem to be standing in the way all the time. Maybe that's what you're asking about, but I was referring to the obstacles that are self-created. And those are the ones that as soon as we see that they're self-created, they cease to have their hold on us. But life itself is full of difficulties. And we have to pay attention to those difficulties and find the skillful means to negotiate them. Ignoring them and pretending that, they're not there won't help. Won't help anything at all. Right now we have an obstacle that we call the pandemic. Well, we have to pay careful attention to how we need to behave, in the midst of this really threatening circumstance. And we have to pay attention. But we don't have to keep into existence the obstacles that we create. With practice, we can see through them. And if you really see through them, they tend to evaporate. I don't know if that's the best way of putting it, but I think we can all experience that. And I think the Great Way itself has no obstacles. Even the pandemic is not an obstacle to the Great Way. And one way of approaching these universal sources of suffering is to spur us on to practice, because that is how we find the Great Way, how we find our way through all of these difficulties. That's our path, and that's what we're doing today. That's what we're committed to. Are there any other questions? Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure you weren't talking to somebody else. I didn't want to talk over somebody.
Were you raising your hand?
Yeah. Now can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Hello? Yeah? Okay.
I can hear you.
So my question about here in Israel, we have lots of demonstrations against Netanyahu and the prime minister. And as we speak and as it goes, many people also say that we should not become extreme and not have any hateful feelings, and to look in ourselves. There's a lot of mindfulness going on, all these talks. And I always wonder whether it's not like a talk that just makes you subside all these feelings that also contribute to change. So what is hate in this
Yeah, who are advising?
Even people who come to the demonstration themselves, like a very known singer, started to say that it's starting to get against one person instead of a problem that exists in the country. This, but actually there is one person who controls everything. So.
You're Israeli, so I tend to believe you rather than my own opinions on this. I don't have many opinions about it because I'm not well informed. It certainly doesn't do any good to pretend that a problem doesn't exist. And if Netanyahu is widely perceived to be the most significant problem, then I would say it's best to pay attention to that. Certainly with anything like this, you have to look closely for yourself and examine, all of the evidence, and then carefully consider what the best course of action is. Maybe the best course is peaceful protests. Maybe the best course is a violent revolution. I don't know. Usually that doesn't work out too well, the violent revolution. trying to negotiate a peaceful solution sometimes seems impossible, and I can certainly sympathize with the situation in your country. The situation in our country doesn't seem to be much better. Which one do you like? You know, which it's not a choice that we have to make, of course. And one is more than enough. But yeah, paying close attention, not being swayed by strong emotions, but really looking carefully, keeping your mind as clear as possible, not automatically following predispositions. This sort of advice. And why don't you let us know in a few months how things are going? I hope they're going a lot better. Thank you. Jennifer, were you speaking?
Yes. So, and you kind of addressed it just now, but you were mentioning with Jacob that, when we have these roadblocks that we create for ourselves, and you said to see through them, which, and as I was, we have roadblocks that are like mental roadblocks. I guess they're all mental, but some of them are like actually like things we do, like habits that are not necessarily so good. For instance, like, like now that I've been home forever, my sleep schedule has gotten to where I go to bed maybe at midnight, but then sleep really late in the morning. And it's not necessarily the best schedule to keep. It's not bad, but how do we see through these roadblocks that are habits as opposed to just mental roadblocks? Does that make sense?
Maybe. Mind makes everything. It makes the roadblocks. Mental or habits are simply mental roadblocks that will have become a habit because we keep reinforcing them. And it's good to see what we keep reinforcing them and the reasons why we, reinforce them. Why is it so difficult for us to see through something that may, well be a really negative habit, but we just think of it. Think most people are like this. I know I'm subject to this. Well, this is just the way I am. And leave it at that. And I never like hearing that from others. Well, this is the way I am and you'll have to accept it. And I never like seeing it in myself. So, the statement, I am, can be followed by any predicate nominative, to use grammatical terms here, whether it's an adjective or a noun. And I think whenever you use such an expression, I am whatever, and that explains everything. And that's my excuse for everything. So how can we see through that? Sometimes a good and noble friend might be able to help, but that good and noble friend puts herself in jeopardy of being a former friend, acting like that. So you can't depend on that. When I was growing up Catholic, we had a process that was strongly recommended. It was called an examination of conscience. And you did this as preparation for the sacrament of confession, where you go into this little confessional booth and confess all your sins to the priest, who then says something like, say, 3 Our Fathers and 3 Hail Marys and make a good act of contrition. It was actually quite a useful process, at least the examination of conscience. I don't know how many of you had that experience, when you were young. It's maybe a hand or two going up. And I think it's a useful process because these habits of mine, if it's a habit, it's ingrained and we tend to take it as an inevitable part of our personality. Well, I'm just someone who does this or whatever like that. And I kind of get nostalgic sometimes for my Catholic childhood for a few things, not many, but that's one of them, the examination of conscience. And it's not as if you're putting a guilt trip on yourself. In fact, I don't remember experiencing it that way even when I was a kid. It's just, oh yeah, I did that. It's not so good. So I'll tell the priest. I'll confess. We also had the act of contrition. I remembered it in Latin, confiteor Deo omnipotentia, et cetera, et cetera. And one line was mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. Through my fault, through my own most grievous fault. And that's something that I think we forget too often. That, well, this is because he said or she said or any excuse. So, I'm no longer Catholic, and there are many religions that I haven't been and never will be, but I think that most of them have some valuable practices that are not so perhaps explicit in Buddhism. And, for instance, the examination of conscience is, I don't know a sutra on that, anything like that. So, but paying attention, really paying attention, it involves, not simply, oh, that's a bird singing in the tree, but what am I doing? Why am I doing it? As a habit of mind. Thank you. Yes.
I have a question. I find like there are so many instances where maybe I wish I could come down on the one side or the other. So, but I keep seeing all of different, like I can see all these people, different points of view.
Mm-hmm.
I can't really say which one I want to back up, when I want to back, like, I remember when I was in high school and they were having, there were a lot, that was like the big civil rights movement. And I lived in Denver and there was this big push to have all the schools integrated. So they were going to bus kids back and forth and integrate the schools. And I was talking to a friend of mine who was a Black woman. Well, she was my age, but we were women. And about that. And she said, well, she was a Black Panther. And she said, no, we don't want to have the schools integrated because we don't want to have white, the only reasons our schools are being improved is because the white parents want them improved. We should get them improved because there are Black kids there and it needs to be improved. And I thought, well, that makes sense. And she made sense. And my, integrate the schools friends made sense. And sometimes I think, my practice, I'll become more clear about those things and I don't become more clear. Mm-hmm. They just both make sense. I can see the teachers' problems right now. I can see the students' problems. I can see the parents. And I don't know which side I kind of believe, back.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't feel like my practice is making that even any clearer for me.
Mm-hmm. Practice is a long-term proposition. And sometimes you might look at yourself in the way you're looking at yourself right now, or in other ways. I've been practicing how many years, and I'm still fill in the blank. Some not so good quality that you may still have. So it's good to be aware of persistent problems that we have, and it's even more important to be extremely patient, and to use these perceptions that we have of our shortcomings as motivation for even stronger practice. I will be the last one to say that all of you need to practice more. I don't think I'm the first person to say that because it's universally true.
Is it necessary to come down on one side or the other?
Sometimes it's not. Sometimes there's truth on both sides, and you have to recognize that, and that's the way it is. Then when you have to make a decision, you simply make the best decision that you can, realizing it will not be entirely valid, and you look at it and you look at the consequences that follow, and perhaps you learn something. That's the way life mostly is. Even if, well, maybe the exception is if you're meditating in a cave for 9 years, this doesn't come up so much. But we're always interacting with other people in a very complicated culture, a very complicated society. Human society has, as far as we can tell, been that way, certainly for as long as it's been recorded. The earliest texts we have are texts about conflict, with clearly good people on both sides. So we're still working on that as a species. And whatever however despairing we might be about the results, I think working on it from a basis of practice, the sort of practice we do and other practices, is the best way, even though we're not seeing maybe the results we would really like to see. So thank you for your question. It's a very complicated issue. I wish I had more wisdom on it. We have time for one more question before we return to practice and interviews. Yes, Max? So unmute yourself, please.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, just a follow-up question to the very first question. Attachments or habits or ways of living our life serve as defense mechanisms. And as a beginner, it can be scary. There's an element of fear of starting to let go of your attachments because it's sort of like you're taking your armor off and you're taking your shield off. And how do we approach that as a beginner? How do we really have the courage to say, I'm letting go, I'm dropping all these things?
Well, I would say as a practical matter, choose the attachment that you think causes the most suffering in your life or others. And if you can find that, I think you would be motivated to give it up and try to perceive that you'd be better off not protecting yourself when it comes to this particular behavior that you see is either quite possibly or even most definitely, causing problems, causing suffering. It's certainly not the case that you have to give up everything that you like. So we're not renunciates. That's not our practice. We live in a complicated society. We're not, going off to meditate in a cave for 9 years, however valuable that might be. So you might say there has to be some sort of, at least at first, some sort of compromise. The important thing is to do what it looks like you're doing. Look at it. What can I do about this? What are the consequences of my changing behavior in this way? And bear in mind that although abandoning some set of practices might leave you more vulnerable, the meditation practice that you're doing also makes you stronger and wiser. So if your center is really strong, you can give up almost anything and still be absolutely fine, and in fact, better in terms of a citizen of the world. So try for, how many years was it? Oh yeah, 10,000 years. Soon finish the great work of life and death, get enlightenment, and save all beings from suffering. So thank you. And thank you everyone for your questions. And this being a retreat, I don't think there are any announcements except that we'll return back to practice. I think after a 5-minute break, practice will resume again. So thank you very much.